California task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. Content warning. It contains discussions of racial discrimination, sexual assault, torture, lynching and other forms of extreme violence. Contains unedited historical quotations and photographs of white supremacist hatred, torture, lynching, autopsy, and other forms of graphic violence.
The Wealth Gap Chapter 13. By Introduction. Wealth, what you own minus what you owe, is the key to economic security. It is what enables families to build a better future. Wealth functions in many ways. It provides economic stability during lean times. It opens doors to improving quality of life. It is a dam against the floodwaters of economic catastrophes. It provides access to political power and it allows us to live and retire with dignity. Wealth can also be passed down through generations, allowing children to live better lives than their parents and grandparents. It allows parents to pay for their children's college education. It allows grandparents to help a young family buy their first home. Throughout American history, government policies at all levels have helped white families collect these tools while preventing or undermining black families' ability to do the same. As a result, the wealth gap between black and white Americans is enormous and roughly the same today as it had been 2 years before the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. In 2019, the median black household had a net worth of $24,100. Less than 13% of the median net worth of white households at $188,200. This wealth gap persists regardless of education level and family structure. For example, at the median, single black women over the age of 60 with a college degree, at $11,000, have less than 3% of the wealth of single white women over the age of 60 with a college degree, at $384. 000 single white parents have more than double the wealth, $35,000, at the median, than married black parents, $16,000. The wealth gap is present across all income levels. In 2016, estimates drawn from the Survey of Consumer Finances indicate the median white household in the bottom fifth of incomes, or the poorest quintile, of white households, had a net worth of $21,700, which is greater than the median net worth of $18,601 for all black households. Black households in the bottom fifth of incomes had a median net worth of $2,700, less than 1/8 as much as the poorest quintile of white households. Burnt residences and businesses following the Tulsa Race Massacre. Tulsa, Oklahoma, June 1921, 1965. The trend is the same across social classes. In 2019, the median white working class household had a net worth of $114,270, while the median black professional managerial household had a net worth of $38,800 in the same year. White professional managerial households, at $276. 000, had a median net worth that was 8 times the median black professional managerial household and 19 times the median black working class household. 10. This wealth gap is the result of the discrimination that African Americans experience, as described in the previous chapters 11. The American government at the federal, state, and local levels has systematically prevented black communities from building, maintaining, and passing on wealth. These harms cascade over a lifetime and compound over generations. The historical causes of the wealth gap is based in enslavement and legal segregation and continues through ongoing racial inequality and racism. Today they include direct government creation of white wealth and destruction of black wealth through the support of racial terror, disenfranchisement, land theft, mass incarceration, exclusion of African Americans from government benefits, and banking discrimination. Unequal homeownership, fewer assets, and lower business ownership continue to drive the wealth gap today. This has resulted in racial differences in the capacity of African Americans to transmit resources across generations, lower financial resilience during crises, and homelessness. Section 2 discusses estimates of the contemporary racial wealth gap for the nation as whole, for California, by gender, and for descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States. Section 3 describes historical causes of the racial wealth gap during enslavement and post-enslavement, including racial terror, land theft, mass incarceration, and discrimination in government benefits, the labor market, and banking. Section IV discusses the drivers of the contemporary wealth gap today include unequal homeownership, fewer assets, and lower business ownership. Section V discusses the harmful effects of the wealth gap, which has resulted in racial differences in the capacity of African Americans to transmit resources across generations, lower financial resilience during crisis, and increased homelessness. 2. The contemporary racial wealth gap. National and California estimates. Significant research demonstrate that white Americans have long had a higher net worth than African Americans. The gap has changed little since 1989, when the median white household wealth was $143,000 and the median black household wealth was $9,000. Approximately 94% less than white household wealth. 12. The wealth gap was roughly the same in 2016 as it was in 1962, 2 years before the Civil Rights Act. Preliminary research suggests that, despite rapid accumulation of wealth by African Americans in the decades after slavery and a narrowing of the racial wealth gap during World War II and the Civil Rights era, this progress halted by the mid-20th century, with the racial wealth gap widening over the last several decades. 14. From 2005 to 2019, an interval that captures much of the impact of the Great Recession, median household wealth, all assets minus all debt, among African Americans fell 53%, compared with a drop of 16% among white Americans. 15. An asset is anything you own that adds financial value, as opposed to a liability, which is money you owe. 16 examples of personal assets include a home or other property, such as a rental house or commercial property, a checking or savings account, cars, financial and retirement accounts, gold, jewelry, and coins, collectibles and art, and life insurance policies. 17. Wealth estimates can be demonstrated in median and mean figures, both of which are provided in this chapter. A median figure shows the worth of the middle household in each community. 18. A mean figure shows the worth of the average household in the community. 19. Some researchers suggest that the median is a more useful measure for estimating differences in wealth between black and white people, because it is not affected by exceptions like the few extremely rich individuals who would skew the average higher than is representative. 20. However, researchers also suggest that the mean is the appropriate target measure for calculating the sum required to eliminate the racial wealth gap. 21. The wealth gap was roughly the same in 2016 as it was in 1962. 452. Chapter 13. Policymakers have usually focused on the median gap in wealth, which some researchers argue is not representative of what is happening to the average black or white person in reality. 22. Comparing black and white wealth at the mean, for the average household in each community, shows a far larger wealth gap. 23. Today, white American households continue to be far more likely to hold assets, and the types of assets they hold are worth, on average, more than that of black households. 24. In 2019, the most recent year for which data is available, the total financial assets of white households is 9 times higher than black households. 25. The median black household wealth was approximately $24,100, while the median white household wealth was approximately $188,200, a difference of $164,100. 26. The mean for black household wealth is $142,300, while the mean for white household wealth is close to $1 million at $983,400, a difference of $840,900.27. This wealth disparity cannot be explained by lack of personal motivation and effort, lack of financial literacy, family instability, lack of education, lack of homeownership, or lack of entrepreneurship on the part of African Americans. 28. For instance, there is very little, if any, evidence to support the claim that black saving behavior is the source of the enormous racial wealth gap. 29. There is no significant difference in savings between black and white families with similar income levels, nor a difference in rates of return on their personal investments. 30. In fact, in some income categories, black people display a higher rate of savings. 31. And though African Americans have more family obligations on their income than white Americans because their relatives are more likely to need help than white Americans, the savings rate among black people is comparable to the savings rate at each level of household income among white people. 32. Differences in family structure also do not explain the racial wealth gap. 33. Single white women with children have a higher median net worth than black women with no children. 34. At the median, single white parents have more than 2 times the wealth, $35,000, than married black parents, $16,000. 35. Nor does effort or education for comparable levels of family socioeconomic status. Black youth obtain more years of schooling and credentials, including college degrees, than white youth. 36. And the wealth gap exists between black and white women regardless of whether or not they have a bachelor's degree. 37. Although the wealth gap and its causes in California and the nation is an understudied area, preliminary studies suggest that the racial wealth gap in California is the same or worse than it is at the national level. Some studies extrapolate California's racial wealth gap from national estimates. 38. Direct California estimates of the racial wealth gap are only available for a single metropolitan area, Los Angeles. 39. In 2016, while the median net worth of white Angelino households, assets minus debts, was $355,000. Median net worth of native-born black Angelino households was $4,000. 40. The average black household in Los Angeles had only just had 1% of the median wealth of the average white household, far worse than the national average of 10 to 15%. 41. Gender-specific issues. The wealth gap between black men and black women, which is small, 42, functions differently than the wealth gap between white men and white women, which is much larger. Black men and women have similarly low wealth, although for slightly different reasons. 43. The wealth gap between white men and women is largely because white men have traditionally had access to jobs that provide retirement accounts and other benefits available to careers not available to women. 44. This difference in access does not exist between black men and women, as African Americans of all genders historically have been excluded from these benefits due to labor discrimination. As discussed in Chapter 10, Stolen Labor and Hindered Opportunity. In 2019, white households owned assets than black households. 9x more. This wealth disparity cannot be explained by lack of personal motivation and effort, family instability, or lack of education. For example, in 2019, black professional managerial households had a net worth of $38,800, while white professional managerial households had a net worth of $276,000. Single white parents had more than 2 times the wealth, at $35,000, of married black parents, at $16,000. The median wealth for single black women is $200, while the median wealth of single black men is $300. 45 studies that show a greater wealth gap between black women and men do not appear to take into account incarcerated black men. who were deprived of their ability to build wealth for themselves and their family during a prison sentence. 46. Federal statistical agencies, including the U.S. Census Bureau, collect little information about people who are incarcerated, and they are excluded from household samples in national surveys. 47. As a result, these individuals are invisible to most mainstream social institutions, lawmakers, and nearly all social science research not directly related to crime or criminal justice. 48. And since African Americans are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than white Americans, this has the effect of making it appear that African Americans are better off financially than they really are. 49. As discussed below in Section 3, criminal convictions also create numerous barriers to wealth building even after the sentence ends. Still, black women face barriers to wealth building due to the combination of racism and sexism. As a result, there are vast differences in wealth between black women and both white men and white women. 51. Study reports that, in 2019, single black women's median net wealth was $7,000, while median net wealth for white women was $85,000 and $92,000 for single white men. 51. While white men's median wealth was $28,900 in 2015, black women's median wealth was $200, less than 1 cent on every dollar of white men's median wealth. 52. The large wealth gap faced by single black women is particularly important because black women are more and increasingly likely to be single and breadwinners. 53. The marriage rate of Americans aged 25 to 54 has declined since the early 1960s across all groups, but especially for black women, for whom it has halved to less than 40%. 54. 1/3 of black women aged 25 to 54 are single with children in the household. 55. Among black mothers, more than 80% are breadwinners compared to 50% of white mothers. 56. At least half of unmarried black women have zero or negative assets. 57. On average, black women do not accumulate net worth approaching retirement. They have no financial assets at age 50 and do not accumulate any more as they age. 58. Black men also face a stark wealth gap with white women and men. One study reports that, in 2015, median net wealth for black men was 15% of the median net wealth for white men and 16% of the wealth of white women. 59. While white men's median wealth was $28,900 in 2015, black men's median was $300, about 1 cent on every dollar of white men's wealth. 60. There does not appear to be extensive research on wealth gap estimates for black LGBTQ populations. Estimates based on immigration and migration patterns. Today, approximately 41 million black people live in the United States, according to the 2020 census. 61 of those 41 million black individuals, experts differ on how many are the descendants of black people enslaved in the United States. About 12% of black people in America were born in a foreign country. 62.9% of African Americans have at least one foreign-born parent. 63. By 2060, the black foreign-born population is projected to make up about 1/3 of the U.S. black population. 64. 58% of black immigrants arrived in the United States after 2065. Of the current 28 million black Californians, 244,969 are foreign-born, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. 66. 2015 median wealth for singles: white men $28,900, white women $15,640, black men $300, black women $200, Every U.S. census conducted since 1970 has found that black immigrants from the English-speaking Caribbean earn more, are more likely to be employed than U.S.-born African Americans, are more likely to hold more financial assets, 67 are more likely to own their home, 68 and most are more likely to be healthy than U.S.-born African Americans, 69. There appears to be no data at the national and state level and limited scholarship at the city level describing the wealth gap between descendants of black people enslaved in the United States, recent black immigrants, and white Americans. 70 Very few of the city-level studies present findings on the wealth gap that disaggregates the racial category of black by national origin. 71 Some scholars argue that the effects of systemic racism have uniquely harmed African American descendants of slavery when compared to black immigrants who do not have the same experience of systemic racial discrimination in the United States. 72. One study, The Color of Wealth in Los Angeles, included separate data for U.S.-born African Americans and recent immigrants from Africa. 73 National origin and race were both self-reported in this study. 74 On average, white Angelenos were far more likely to hold assets in stocks, mutual funds, and investment trusts than both U.S.-born and African black Angelenos. 75. But, African black Angelenos were likely to hold more assets than U.S.-born black Angelenos. For example, 87% of African black Angelenos owned liquid assets versus 62% of black Angelenos born in the United States. 76 80% of African black Angelenos had a checking account versus 68% of U.S.-born African Americans. 77 80% of African black Angelenos had a savings account versus 56% of U.S.-born black Angelenos. 78 Such studies in other cities reflect comparable wealth gaps between U.S.-born African Americans and recent immigrants. 79.